The Afghan-American novelist Khaled Hosseini has just published his first novel in 6 years, And the Mountains Echoed. His best-known book, The Kite Runner, has sold tens of millions of copies around the world and was turned into a movie. His latest novel touches on some of the same themes. I chatted with Hosseini earlier today.
This book is about a pair of siblings that we meet early in the 1950s. A boy and his little sister. He's 10, she's 3, and they love each other to death. They live in a small Afghan village. And when we meet them, they're on their way to Kabul with their father, ostensibly so their father has found work. But what actually happens in Kabul ends up rupturing the bond between the two siblings, separates them, and affects each of them in very specific ways. And then that one act of separation between these two children has a number of echoes and ripples across time, generations, and ends up affecting the lives of a whole slew of other characters who then tell their part of the story.
And once again, family is a central theme. Once you have mothers and daughters, and you have fathers and sons. Now you have the impact of the relationship between two siblings, whether they're together or separated, and how that shapes each individual.
Yeah, I love writing about family because I think all the great themes of life can be found in families and literature. For me, every family is so dynamic and so different. I love the way people interact with each other within families, the way there's so many conflicting and contradicting dynamics within families. It's incredibly rich.
How did family shape you?
Well, I was born in Afghanistan, raised there. You know, their family is so central to your identity. You don't think of yourself as an isolated individual. I mean, I was somebody's son, somebody's cousin, somebody's nephew, and so I understood my world through my connections with family.
And in the West, that's very different. You're explaining that, in many cases, to a Western audience, where the individual is perhaps more of an individual and less a part of a wider group.
Well, we go out of our way to be individuals in the West. You know, we mark our bodies. You know, our movies' message is be yourself, you know, whereas it's sort of the opposite there.
And I wonder, how does being an American with these roots in Afghanistan, in a completely different culture, have an impact on your work, on the way you see the world?
Well, you know, I've sort of become this hyphenated person, and I live my life very naturally. Afghan-American.
But that's very American too, isn't it?
It is, very much so.
Arab-American, Muslim-American, Afghan-American.
Yeah, and I don't really think about it. It's like I don't spend much time thinking about it. I'm an American also. Oh, but I'm also Afghan. Yeah. I just live my life, and my life is made up of this kind of melange of the two sides of of the two cultures.
And you're using a French word. You lived in Paris. Yeah. I mean, this is your book, the latest one, is generationally spread out, but it's also geographically spread.
Yeah, the heart of the book is still in Afghanistan, but as the book progresses, the story spreads out, you know, expands outward, goes from this village, it goes to Kabul, it goes to Europe, in Greece, and France, and the United States. So it's like sort of my most global book, I guess.
But I've got to ask you something about you as a writer. What do you read? What do you read when you're reading fiction?
Well, I read a lot of contemporary fiction. I like to read novels from all parts of the world. I'm just right now, for instance, reading the new novel by Jhumpa Lahiri called The Lowland, which is beautiful. I love reading novels from that part of the world, from South Asia, for instance. Mohsin Hamid had a beautiful novel out called How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia. So I love to read contemporary fiction with a kind of international flavor.
And do you read a lot? I mean, do you have time because you're so busy?
I'm reading a lot on my book tours, I'll tell you that. I'm cracking out 4 or 5 novels on these book tours. But I'm a chain reader. I go from one book to the next.
All right. And so what inspires you? I mean, when you sit down and think, well, how am I going to get started? Do you ever have a block? Do you ever have a block for the next novel? What gets you started? Usually
a picture, an image, some kind of line of dialogue. This book began with a very vivid picture of a guy walking across the desert, pulling a little red wagon. Inside of it is a little girl, and there's a boy walking behind him. And that's kind of how this whole thing started. And
like
I began exploring.
Picture? You just
like
saw
a picture. I just saw it in my mind, and I just started exploring it, and it just snowballed from there.
And one of the things that I thought was interesting is, before I ask you what you're working on, or you think you're going to be, or hope you're going to be working on next, is you told the Guardian newspaper that if I could go back now, I'd take the Kite Runner apart. Everybody here in this newsroom, by the way, is coming clustering, thinking, oh, the Kite Runner, it touched me, it made me cry, this and that. And you're saying, well, I would change it.
Well, what I'm saying is I'm 10, 12 years older. Yeah. I'm a different writer now, and I think I have different sensibilities. And writers will never stop self-editing, and somebody has to take the book away from them, say it's done. So I think if I were, if I were to go back and write that book, it would probably be written a little different. It may not be the same book as it was.
Really? But maybe perhaps in a way, maybe not as popular.
Yeah, it's probably for the best.
What are you working on? I mean, do you have already plans for the next?
I have a few ideas, but right now I won't know if they're going to stick until I actually sit down and work on them. So. Well,
when you've sold 38 million books, do you worry that there's so much pressure on you that now everybody's going to be judging you by the standards of those wildly successful?
Well, everybody asks that, but the thing is that once you start a project and you're in the thick of it, you're just so involved with those characters in that world that all that stuff just kind of dies down.
Khaled Hosseini, the author of The Kite Runner, and his new book, And the Mountains Echoed, came out as well, talking to me about his latest novel.